Hello there, welcome back to the channel, where today we'll be taking a look at All Monsters Attack, and spoiler alert, it's not good. From the story, to the action, to the special effects, this movie flops in all fronts in the most hilarious way imaginable. I've mentioned that this franchise has been steering its movies towards younger demographics for a while, but now that I've seen what this entails, I don't think I even had to mention it. This was the first Godzilla movie to sell under 2 million tickets, and it's obvious why. But without any further ado, let's get into my review of All Monsters Attack. Enjoy. All Monsters Attack starts near a factory, the car speeding down a street and a boy named Ichiro noting how it sounds like Manila. He then breaks into song about how the factory and capitalism are the real monsters. I wish I was joking. Ichiro then finds what's called a vacuum tube, but I'm pretty sure it's an inhaler or an asthma pump. Anyway, a bully steals it from him and then tells him he only get it back if he pranks his worker painting a sign. Ichiro refuses to, so they chase him away. Also, that car from earlier was actually involved in a robbery of 50 million yen, and was abandoned shortly after, with the criminals still in the area. Ichiro goes to his neighbor's house and talks to a toy maker while the moon landing happens. If you think that's weird, or messes with the timeline of these movies, just wait and see. Ichiro talks to the inventor about how he wishes to go to Monster Island, as the monsters there are way stronger than Gabara, who is also his bully. He goes back home and uses a device he made out of cardboard before falling asleep and dreaming about being on a plane to Monster Island. The other passengers are sent to the negative zone before he arrives on Monster Island, and oh look, that's reused footage. He climbs a tree and sees a bunch of monsters before even more reused footage. Kamakura appears and chases him, but guess what? It's reused footage. What's even better is that so far, I've used each of these shots in my previous reviews, so it's very likely that you'll recognize a few of them. Ichiro falls down a hole, and forget -1, this movie deserves an Oscar for visual effects. I might be being a bit too harsh on it, but I've really got nothing to work with besides pointing out the reused footage. He climbs out of the hole with a vine, and who else is there than the son of Godzilla? Hey, if this movie is reusing parts from previous installments, I don't see why I can't. Manila then talks to him, and this is what he sounds like. これが本当の怪獣だ! Gabara shows up sounding like a DJ had a seizure, and the boy gets voided before turning it to a telephone. Again, there's really not much to work with here. The telephone wakes the boy up and he answers his mum, who is on the other side, and she tells him she unfortunately can't be home by tonight. The boy tries to go back to sleep, but he can't, and so he goes outside. However, the bullies are nearby, so he hides in an abandoned building until the bullies decide to follow a police car that is searching for the robbers. He finds an old piece of tech and comes up with the idea to give it to the bully to convince him to stop, as well as a headset and a piece of paper before he leaves when a siren sounds. On the floor above, the two thieves leave their hiding spot and look through a hole in the floor. Turns out that the piece of paper was one of the thieves' driver's license, which fell down the hole when he wasn't looking. Ichiro goes back to his dream on Monster Island and Gabara appears, accompanied by some truly amazing editing. Ichiro manages to escape and runs into Melina again, and I've never related to a kaiju more. Godzilla appears and, yep, reused footage and even more reused footage. Gabara catches up to Ichiro and Melina grows to his normal height and starts making sounds like he used to. For all this movie's faults, I do have to give them credit for why kaiju don't normally talk, even if this is absurd. Anyway, Melina inevitably loses the battle and Gabara stomps away, looking a bit strange with his lack of a tail or dorsal plates. Fighter jets fly ahead, but don't worry. It's not to advance the plot or to make Monster Island side of things more interesting with humans trying to capture or destroy the kaiju. That would be too nuanced. Yes, once again, it's also they can reuse footage, and this time they did the original scene even dirtier than usual. They cut out the funny music in the background. While they fight, quite possibly the worst scene for this situation plays. We also get our first look at this movie's Godzilla design, and it's not too special, but at least it looks better than Son of Godzilla. Neela has to learn with Godzilla, and I'm not entirely sure if this is reused footage or not. If it is, then they definitely put a lot more effort to disguise it, because the scene this might be from took place at night. That's the main reason why I'm mixed on whether this is reused, as the way Godzilla teaches him is exactly the same as in Son of Godzilla, so either this is reused or Godzilla is one of the worst parents ever. Ichiro wakes up to the robbers trying to steal the driver's license, and they kidnap him. Later, he tells them that Melina is in danger before falling asleep, when Melina is being beaten up by Gabara again. Thankfully, Godzilla appears and Melina shrinks back down and hides with Ichiro. They make a plan to send Gabara flying using a log, and they do indeed send Gabara flying using a log. Together, Melina and Godzilla defeat Gabara, but Godzilla doesn't take too kindly to Ichiro being on fake Dream Monster Island. He wakes up before Godzilla gets too close, and the robbers try to get him to go in a car. However, he has a flashback to what Melina told him and runs away, and they play cat and mouse for a couple minutes before he eventually cuts him with a fire extinguisher. Police show up and find the money in the car before arresting the criminals, and Ichiro's mother tells him that she won't ever work overnight again. The end. I'm joking, there's still quite a bit of the movie left. The next morning, the press asks Ichiro what helped him to stop the criminals, and he tells them that he had Manila. Confused, they ask the inventor what he means, and he explains that much like adults believe in higher power, kids believe in monsters. Basically, Ichiro views Manila as a god. This is such a random movie. Ichiro meets the bullies who ask him if he wants to join them, but he politely declines and lets them continue on their day. Just kidding, that would be too tame for this movie. He channels his inner Godzilla and attacks the bullies before honking the bicycle horn next to the painter, knocking him over. That innocent worker had spent several days painting it at this point, but now his hard work and reputation are all ruined because of one boy. Because that's what the higher being known as Melina would do. So when I make these videos, I write the script, record it, and then edit the audio over relating footage. To be honest, I'm not sure how someone would edit the audio before writing the script, but I'm getting off track. Long story short, this means that if I find out about something while editing, I'm unlikely to include it in the video. Anyways, while I was making the last few videos, I noticed something, specifically when I was making the info panel in the intro. So the reason why B-Ray and Son of Godzilla are so different to Astro Monster and Destroy Monsters is because they weren't directed by Ichiro Honda. Now, judging by this movie's quality, you'd assume that this also wasn't directed by Honda, but no, it was. The last Godzilla movie he directed for over 20 years, but we're not talking about that today. I do like how he waited until the 90s to continue with this franchise after he was time skipped to that time period. Also, I'm assuming that Destroy Monsters takes place at the end of the Showa era's timeline, and unfortunately no battles from it appear, so I can't fault this movie for having the plot hole of a 12-year-old boy correctly predicting an event 30 years in advance. However, I can fault it for having the plot hole of a 12-year-old boy correctly predicting several battles that have already taken place shot for shot, but I'm not that petty. Also, I'd like to propose a theory I have about this movie. It's not canon. Kinda. So, what if instead of this being set in the Godzilla universe, it's set in our universe, and it's based around a fan who watched all the previous movies? This explains why no kaiju actually appear, and how the boy knows Minita's name, Godzilla's different foes and battles, and just wraps up the plot hole surrounding that, including the moon landing. It'd make complete sense for him to instantly recognize the kaiju and for Godzilla's design to change suddenly, though it does make this entire movie feel pointless if thankfully non-canon. Actually, does it even matter if it's canon or not? No monsters appear in this movie's lore. Genuinely, none. Even the newcomer, Carbonaro, whatever his name is, I forgot it despite finishing the movie literally yesterday. Anyway, he is just a dream. If you cut out all the dream parts, this movie would be terrible. No. In fact, it is terrible. 30% of it is from other movies, and the main plot is so generic and basic that I can sum it up in one sentence. Boy gets into trouble with criminals and Godzilla inspires him to defeat them. That's it. There were times while writing the script where I thought back to this movie, only to do a double take and realise I was thinking of a scene from Son of Godzilla or Destroy All Monsters. This movie is so forgettable that the only real remembered aspect about it is how bad it is. Originally, my review part of this video was going to be stitched together from all of my other videos because they did that. But I realised that would not only be incredibly jarring and boring to listen to, but also a spit in the face for anyone who took the time to actually watch my other videos. Naming no names. What also doesn't help is that this is by far the shortest Godzilla movie yet, clocking in at barely over an hour. I guess if you hadn't seen any Godzilla movies, this one would be decent, but let's be real. This ain't 1969 anymore. No one is watching this movie other than big Godzilla fans. My reasoning for why barely any new fights appear in this is that, well, budget reasons and pure laziness, but also, this is meant to be like an epic battles compilation video for the little ones so they can enjoy the spectacle without any of the boring parts between them. You know, the context, the stakes, the actual weight that makes these movies actually fun to watch. Imagine if the next movie in the Monsterverse involves Gia having dreams about Kong and Skull Island fighting the Skull Devil, but then he fights the Hollow Earth Snake, then he fights the Hollow Earth Snake Water Edition, or King Ghidorah fighting Godzilla for a couple minutes before Kong shows up, then hard cut to Mecha appearing, and then Scar King and Shimu. The backgrounds look vaguely similar, and the fights do look cool, but Godzilla's design changes constantly and you can easily recognize him sheeping out. All while Suko babbles in your ear and Green Godzilla with a bad haircut terrorizes him. That's what the average Godzilla fan back then probably felt watching this movie. The parts of Monster Island don't feel like the reused footage to support them, but that they're there to transition between the reused footage. That sentence made no sense whatsoever, but it's staying in. I thought that the reused footage would be a flashback, where Manila talks about the times when Godzilla was strong enough to encourage Ichiro, and not as blatant as retconning a random bird to be a rodent. So the parts of Monster Island are boring, and the parts outside are mediocre at best, but do not have anything that makes this franchise Godzilla. I know how he's been shoehorned into other movies, but this is taking the cake. You could easily replace it with Gamera or Superman, and the story wouldn't be different in the slightest. But, despite all the negatives, I don't hate it. I don't hate movies if they are bad, but instead if they are boring. If I can appreciate the effort behind it, the vision, or the memories this film gave, I can look past the flaws and enjoy this film as the worst Godzilla film. Well, not the worst movie. There's one other movie, well, three actually, that I believe deserve that title. I haven't watched them and I want to go, and it's completely fresh, so I'll have to wait and see about those. If you're a long-time fan who grew up watching Godzilla, this might have been your favourite movie. It might even be your favourite movie now, so I do have to give it credit when it's due. In fact, the reused footage might have made this movie better to watch for long-time fans who've seen the previous movies, as you can point out the obvious flaws and go along with this campy mess. So all in all, yeah, it's easily the worst movie so far by a mile. But one of the reasons why I love this franchise and why my YouTube channel is based around it is because there's so much variety. Godzilla can stand for nuclear fallout, survivor's guilt, Mother Nature, natural disasters, and so much more. And there's so much to talk about, so I'll never run out of ideas. The worst thing a movie can do is be boring, but not to fit the tone of the movie, just bad writing making it a slog to sit through. One final thing to know about this film is its other message, which is more subtle, though not extremely so. The main cast all live near a massive factory, and they call it the real monster. The kid needs an asthma pump, most likely due to the gas. The mother has to work constantly, and they lived in an unkept area that's full of trash. If that's too subtle for you, next time Godzilla will fight a walking pile of pollution in one of the most obvious messages these movies have ever had. Until then, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all later.